Welcome to Urgent Conversations. My guest today is Ian Pavlik. We're going to get into an introduction first. Great to have you here, by the way, Ian.
Thank you.
And normally Colin reads those introductions, but Colin's away on sabbatical, so I'm gonna start off here. And Ian, I'm going to read your introduction, kind of merged with the introduction of your foundation as well, because I think they both align well. So bear with me here, where there's a lot of ground to cover in this intro, which is great. So here we go. Ian Pavlik is a Barrie, Ontario-based entrepreneur, philanthropist, and community leader whose work focuses on creating practical local solutions that improve the lives of children and families. After founding and growing the technological company Pavliks.com, and if people are looking at that, it's with an S before the .com, Ian and his wife Sarah established the Pavlik Foundation in 2012 to channel their family's charitable efforts towards meaningful community impact. The foundation's flagship initiative, Kids Pantry, which we're going to talk about a bit, provides weekend food support for children facing food insecurity, ensuring that they return to school nourished and ready to learn. Beyond the Pavlik Foundation, Ian is deeply involved in civic and volunteer leadership. He has been an active member of the Rotary Club of Barrie for more than 25 years and currently is the chair of the Rotary Club of Barrie Charitable Foundation, which provides funding to local and international humanitarian projects. Ian also serves on the board of directors of the Ethnic Mosaic Alliance, a not-for-profit organization that promotes diversity, inclusion, and cross-cultural understanding across Simcoe County. So, Ian, I've given you the long introduction. Again, I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
But I think even with the long introduction, there's a lot more ground that we can cover. So I'm looking forward to it. What I want to start off with, I always want to see how you came about being involved in the projects, what drove you to them. So very much my first question to you is simply, well, maybe not simply, because depending on where we go with this, right? But what personally brought you to start the Pavlik Foundation?
Well, just one little correction. Apologies. We started the foundation in 2021. I think you said 2012,
Oh,
but
okay.
so it's been 4 years, heading into our fifth year now. And when we exited from our business, Pavliks.com, so we sold it about 4 and a bit years ago, we knew that we wanted to do something. We just couldn't, quote, play golf or read. We needed to do something else. And we had a passion about initiatives that were around the youth. We've had a couple profound experiences in our kids' lives as they grew up. And that shaped sort of our interest in trying to do what we could to mitigate some of the challenges that we see with youth in our community. So that underpinned this desire to do something. The foundation just became the mechanism to be able to serve. And we came from a world of growing and developing a business, and really a charity or a foundation is a business. It just has a different financial outcome. And we knew that was something we were reasonably good at, tied with our passion to help youth. And those two married together gave us an outlet for our activities and the day-to-day life now. And it's become, when we first started the foundation in 2021, it was more about researching and trying to understand the landscape as it has to do with youth in education and youth in food insecurity. So those are the two tenets of what our focus is with the Pavlik Foundation. And so we spent a lot of time just understanding the landscape. What are the other organizations and charities and people that are making a difference in our community in those two areas? And then we started to help financially those organizations, but also explore areas where we could, do something hands-on ourselves.
You've given me a lot of threads to work with. So there's a lot of questions I'm going to kind of follow
Sure.
up on. But one thing I just wanted to kind of mention, because I thought it's brilliant in a way that you were able to bring the ability you had as running a business into starting the nonprofit. Because again, I see sometimes where people want to start something up, but they don't have the quite the kind of the layout of what's actually needed to be done in terms of the reality of the monetary aspect, how to get things developed a little bit faster sometimes, and so on. So I do want to kind of visit that topic as well, and maybe talk about in terms of where you might suggest that people maybe who don't have that background, right, where they could reach out and get the experience. So we want to, I definitely want to come back to the one thread as well. I do, and depending, however you want to talk about it, and it could be in a broader sense, but in terms of those, some of those really specific things, maybe that brought you to say, okay, this is the moment where I really want to start this foundation. Maybe, in terms of why the kids pantry. And then the last thread, so again, I'll repeat these Ian as we go, but just,
Yeah,
I'm kind of warming you up for where we're going to go with this. The other one I really want to talk about because I think it's really important. One thing I noticed right away when I was looking at your foundation, there's a very clear scope. So I want to make sure we get to that too, where you focused on helping the children, for example, versus the parents. And we'll get
yeah,
into, and I mean, I don't want to say not helping the parents, but not directly helping the parents,
sure.
focusing on children. So I
Yeah.
think that's really important for when people look at what projects they can really have an impact in. So we've got those three threads. I'll keep repeating them as we go. It doesn't matter which one we delve into, Ian. So if one of them you're kind of, hey, I want to address that one first, we
Yeah.
can get into maybe the scope one, right? Because I think that would be quite interesting from your approach.
Yeah, so we talking about the scope of why so with the Pavlik Foundation, we started a program about a year and a half ago, just to let people know, called Kids Pantry. So Kids Pantry is a program we branded it a little different than the Pavlik Foundation. And it's the first thing that we're doing hands-on as opposed to financially providing aid to other charities that are delivering programs. Kids Pantry is our first real hands-on delivery for us. So when we were looking at the food insecurity landscape as it pertains to youth, we did a lot of conversations with the food bank, with other organizations like Berry Families Unite or Glowing Hearts, or there's a couple of churches that provide pantry-like support, food support. There's the Food Ontario, the Nutrition Council, Eat Well to Excel. So I say we, primarily Sarah, my wife, spent a lot of time mapping out how does a dollar of financial support end up with food in a kid's mouth? And it is fascinating and a little hard to take the chain of that dollar to get to the point where the kid has an apple or a granola bar or whatever. And it that whole system on uh, kind of goes down into you got the food banks, the very food bank or food banks in general, which provide emergency support, where a family, usually the parent or caregiver, has to go and say, "Help! I need help." Food banks typically only give about a third of the food that a family needs for a month. So there's the two-thirds that they still have to come up with, where they're either purchasing themselves or through other support mechanisms. And then the other opportunity for a child to get food is through the school. And that's during Monday to Friday during the school year, where there are snack programs or maybe a breakfast program. Most schools have only one type of food program. So they might have a snack program or a lunch program. Actually, I don't, not many in Simcoe County have a lunch program, or they might have a breakfast program. None really have all of them. And what those are is a chance for a child to come to school to, without any stigma, grab an apple, grab a granola bar, a cheese string, something like that, and eat for the day. So, what through our research, we realized that weekends were a gap and that a child had access to the food that was supplied through the food bank, a small snack during the week. But on the weekends, they really just depended upon whatever their household could provide. And for every number of kid that goes hungry, there are that many scenarios and of why the kid is going hungry. And so for us, we spent a lot of time thinking, okay, how do we help a kid eat and be filled? And there's a spectrum there of put food in the kid's hand to eat or advocacy on the other end, go advocate at the federal level or provincial to try to change policy so that for whatever the reason is, the family unit is able to provide food. And many different sort of layers in between. And we felt like it was too big and daunting of a task. And there were others that were already working on the policy side that we just wanted to help a kid eat, and that in the moment would provide a benefit in many different ways. So how do we help the kid eat? And then so we narrowed it down to this idea of food on a weekend. So just to explain to the people who are watching or listening, that Kids Pantry is a program where we provide a backpack of food uh, to a child every Friday. That is all the food that they need from Friday dinner to Saturday breakfast, snack, lunch, and dinner. Same on Sunday, and then breakfast on Monday. So really, they have 10 meals for the whole weekend. And then on Monday or Tuesday, when they go back to school, they return the empty backpack, and then we pick it up, refill it on the Friday, and rinse and repeat. And so they get a backpack of food 52 weeks of the year, so that when even on holidays or in the summer, we provide a backpack of food delivered to their house. We only feed the kid. And so you sort of reference that. Again, we're trying to not solve all the problems. We're focused on the child, and trying to feed the whole household, A, would be more costly. B, we feel like by subsidizing the food for the child, the food that they could get, that the parent or caregiver could get through other mechanisms like the food bank and other services, should be enough there, or hopefully is enough. But so what we decided on was we're going to feed the kid all weekend. And then what we learned early on as we started to intake children and families into the program, as we were doing intake calls with the parents and caregivers, was that, oh, there's an infant at home, a 2-year-old infant, or we're supplying a child through a grade school, they're in grade 3, but they have a sibling who's in high school. So we adapted and said, well, we want to feed every kid in the household. So what we do is provide a grocery card for the infant and for the teenage kid in the backpack if there are other kids at home, so that every kid, the kid doesn't bring it home and suddenly 2 other children go and ravage the backpack for food for the weekend. There's financial support, because it's not practical for a child to carry 3 backpacks home, because each
Yeah.
backpack can be 10 to 12 pounds. So anyway, so I don't know if that answers your question about the scope, but it was a decision to try to feed a kid specifically on that sort of scale that narrowed us down to this program.
Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to take us to, because the advantage I had is, and what sparked having you on my podcast is I was very lucky to see you present and talk about this specific program, some of the things you talked about. So I appreciate, because you're filling in the viewers, I'm going to fill them in a little bit. There's certain beats that really resonated with me as well. And then again, you covered it really well, but again, you gave me even more threads. So I hope if we, we'll hopefully cover them all relatively systematically, but we'll see where the conversation takes us. Because the way from my viewpoint, I think it's incredibly helpful, again, for how are people going to have an impact if they want to start something similar or get involved. And in terms of choosing that grassroots and concentrating on, that specific part of the family. So again, children in this aspect. One thing that really resonated to me during our presentation, so I'm going to try to get you to maybe repeat that in some way, or whatever the case is. You talked about, for example, which I think is a key point, that by helping the children, you're taking pressure off the parents. So there were cases where a parent might be going, well, I'm not going to eat whatever lunch or dinner or whatever the case is. I'm going to make sure my kids are okay first. And then by having this program, what you're doing is, and again, I thought it was such a valid point. You've taken the pressure off the parents, where they can go, okay, well, my child's fine now. Their nutrition's there, and now it frees up food for myself as well. So there's that overarching arc as well.
And
But I
maybe if
think
I
your
just
scope helps. Yeah.
interject for a sec, because I think one of the stories I might have shared, which is maybe hits this point home, is we're delivering to the households periodically. We don't really interact with the children or the parents, because the idea is we drop it off at the school front office, kid picks it up and goes home for the weekend. So we're not directly interacting with the kids unless we drop it off at their home. Say they're not at school on Friday, or they're homesick, or it's a snow day, or what have you. So there's a limited amount of interaction. And there was a parent of 2 kids that we were supporting. And when we first started to work with this family and deliver the backpacks, the father was a single dad household, just looked gaunt and really, really thin and not very healthy. And over the last year plus, as we've been delivering, we've visually noticed that the father looks way healthier, a lot more filled out, a lot more positive, again, in the limited interaction. And we don't have anything to prove this, but we believe that what's happening is that the father is now eating because before they were not, because they were trying to feed the kid. So indirectly, we're supporting the parents or caregiver by taking the pressure off of them to make sure that the kid has enough food. So it benefits on a whole. We had an individual here back a couple of weeks ago, and they were just learning a little bit about the program, and she said from her own experience that she had a point where she had a couple young children and didn't have enough food in the house, and she went hungry. She said she would go days without eating so her kids could. And that was, again, another, I guess, example of feeding the kids then helps offset the burden, and the parent can eat. And then they can take better care of themselves. They could maybe be more productive in their household and society and take care of their kids.
You're removing one of the, I would argue, major concerns that pretty much every parent would have, making sure that they're taking care of the children first. But the example you use, that's exactly the first one you talked about. I recall that really resonated with me as well. It also opens up an interesting aspect too, because in terms of the grassroots, to me, you're also able to see occasionally like the hands-on part. But then I also want to mention as well, right, that I remember during your presentation, you talked about how there was research that went into it as to which areas you're going into, right, overall, based on information that Berry Food Bank might be showing in terms of what I would call, high urgency areas in terms of where people are having crises in terms of even more so than usual in terms of food insecurity. So there's that balance. So I appreciate the fact because, and that a threat too. So I'm glad you clarified as well, because the thing that stood out to me as well, I'm going to get into later, is that the way you've designed the program, it is anonymous. It's not like the kids are basically kind of where their peers can see that they're
Yeah.
receiving this. You're just basically providing, you're dropping off a backpack. It's very inconspicuous in that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's also bears
Yeah.
mentioning.
The backpacks that we drop off they're nondescript. They don't have a logo on it. We make sure that at one school we drop off 13 or 15 backpacks. That's the number of children that pick up backpacks there. They're all different, so it doesn't look obvious when they leave. And they don't have name tags on them. There's name tags on them so that the secretary behind the front desk knows this is Johnny's, this is Susie's bag. But yeah, we try to make it as the child's privacy is important, and what we don't want is a child to be bullied or feel ashamed, because there is that stigma. And you'd be surprised at the number of people or families that are food insecure that don't use a food bank, again, because of pride, maybe because of lack of awareness of what support is out there. It could be they can't afford the bus or a taxi to get to the food bank. There's a whole number of barriers there. And we just want to make sure that we keep the children protected from privacy and from stigma challenges.
But that's one of the key points that I'm glad that we get a chance to address too, because I think in a lot of programs that's the issue as well. I can compare it to, for instance, if I talk about social isolation programs, right? It's when I do that, I'll make sure that the point of contact is individual and anonymous, as opposed to, you're going out and it's not kind of where some people get the impression, whether it's food insecurity, other issues, you're waving, hey, everybody who needs help, come over here, and then they become visible. I'm obviously exaggerating the point, but the anonymous part is really important. I think that's something that I definitely wanted to stress if people are looking at programs they might want to start or be involved with, that is such a key issue. And also right at the front, telling people how the anonymous part functions so that people aren't hesitant and that they can kind of strike that off their list of this is why I'm not going to be involved with it, right? You've also mentioned other barriers as well, but that's the one I really thought is important to resonate and especially, yeah, with kids for sure too in schools. So I think that's great. I mean, to say the least. So
We
yeah,
just on one of those points there, that one of the bits of knowledge we took from working and learning from the other organizations that are out there is we just there's no means test. We don't nobody has to prove the need for kids pantry support. by what we do is we go to a school, we talk to the principal, we say to the principal, okay, we are going to start the program with being able to support 15 kids, say. And can you tell us which 15 kids need support? And they know, right? The teachers know. It's sort of left with the principal and the teachers to identify. Then a note is put in, is given to the kid to take home to the parent, or the principal or teacher calls the parent or caregiver and says, hey, there's an opportunity. Would you be interested in this? We have had a couple of families say no. But yeah, there's it's not put out there to sign up for, and it's not questioning whether they're able to or need it, because the system and even our ability to fulfill the need that's out there, they don't match. The need is far greater than what organizations and what we're able to support. So we're not concerned about, you know, there's a stigma out there from a lot of donors or people who are not aware of the reality of food insecurity, thinking about, oh, it's a free handout. It's not. It's truly a needed basic human right.
No, yeah, we're definitely in agreement on that. And what you're resonating to is the same thing I see in terms of food banks doing overall, where you're not coming in and, let's say providing any financial details or things to say, hey, prove this aspect. The one threat also too that you brought up that I really want to mention because I think it's really worth for people to kind of listen to. Uh, so sometimes people might say no, but I also find in some of the programs that I do. So I don't know if you find that or if other people find it as well. Sometimes when you mention it, people might say no at a certain point, but then if they can think about it for a while, maybe something changes. Hopefully not, but if it gets a little worse, or if they basically just have a little bit of time to analyze and then realize, do some background research, even if they need to, where they don't feel forced into going into whatever might be systematic or that type of nature. And then they might revisit your program and actually say, "Hey, here I am." Right. So I know from my experiences that happens on the programs that I do. So I think it's really important to mention that as well,
Yeah.
especially for people who might be starting smaller grassroots projects where there definitely is a need. And maybe sometimes it starts off a little bit slower, but you have to communicate what's going on. You have to be really clear and all those things we talked about, avoiding stigma. And it's a balance of you're publicizing it, but not in the sense of where you're again going, hey, you, right? You're going to be part of this program. It's more the broad aspect of telling people what it's about. Here's my contact information that's really clear. Come and see us. This is what we're doing. And the other thing too, Ian, that also stood out to me is that very much the reality. So I keep coming back to the scope idea where you really had a very clear focus.
Yeah.
So I do want to take us back to that as well. If you can talk about maybe a little more, like you did cover it pretty well, but in terms of, you talked about the limitations of the resources, the need. There definitely is always a need for food banks. I would say more than we've ever seen. Again, when I look at housing issues, one dominoes into the other. People are making those choices where housing and food, and it's a no-win situation, which one you're
Yeah.
picking. But yeah, if anything else, unless you think you've covered it, I'm okay with that too.
No,
But in terms of the scope
yeah, there's a couple of key things how we decided to approach this, and that was we became aware of the need, but decided we were going to be very systematic about how we develop our processes and not grow too quickly. So we decided on a 1 year pilot where we just focused on one school. We started initially with 10 kids, and then a few months in, we went to 20 and then to 30. But it was just one school. And how we delivered the program at the beginning of the school year in September was quite a bit different than it was at the end of April because we learned from mistakes. And because we were just dealing with one school and a small number of kids, the mistakes weren't that major. We were contained to a small number of backpacks, what have you. Things like, oh, we should have 4 rotating menus rather than the same thing every weekend. And that was realized very quickly within the first week or so. We, at the very beginning, decided not on backpacks. We'd had some input from other organizations to do something similar. They said, no, don't use backpacks. You should use paper bags. So we thought, okay, we'll use paper bags. The very first time we carried the paper bags to the school, it looked so obvious that it was food being delivered. And we're like, nope, that doesn't work for us. And so we quickly adapted and went to the backpack route. It's the processes where we would get a child or a parent would call up and say, my kid won't eat raisins, right? They just won't. Or we had another family that had autistic twins who had a tactile feeling against a certain type of pasta. They just couldn't eat it. It was a tactile thing. So, all right, let's not give them that pasta. So, how do we build a system where we have sort of a set menu? Because you have to have some type of structure, but where we could adapt it for the child. It's not a free for all. We say, what do you want? But here's the structured menu for this week. You can't eat this kind of pasta. Okay, we'll replace it with this item. So, how do we create those processes? So, that was part of the pilot program. And then it was realizing access to the food, right? Having consistent access to the same product. We can't be going out there every month because we buy 1 month at a time, and suddenly randomly buying different food for the backpacks. We needed consistency. So where do you get it? How do we can get consistent pricing? We're running into problems. We were clearing shelves off. So all these are the challenges that we could figure out solutions to because we kept the scope to a pilot in a very contained size. And then this past year, we decided, okay, we're going to expand to a second school. Well, that brought a whole series of issues with how do we identify delivery to one school and another. One school wants it at this time, another school needs delivery that time, and so on. So it became another series of challenges, and so now we've overcome those. But if we just went out of the gate and realized let's go try to feed 100 kids in the first month, I think it would have been a big mess. So that was when you talk about scope, keeping it smaller so that when you grow, you can grow in a more systematic way has been a focus for us.
There's a couple of things in there too that I kind of want to highlight as well for people, and it doesn't necessarily even projects that are exactly kind of a similar nature, but overall. So the one thing that I really because you probably know from talking to me, I love pilot projects, is the getting it going and then maybe creating something that people can follow and doing bigger scales later or whatever the case is. But there's a couple of things that really resonate to me that I see repeated all the time is making sure that you do to the best of your ability have the resources in place, because you don't want to have kind of what I call pulling the rug out from under people's feet where they go, okay, this program's working really well, but let's say for instance if you don't budget and you have a little bit of a, as much as you can, easier said than
Yep.
done, but a bit of a leeway. You don't want to say, hey, this week we're short, we're gonna not be able to meet our goal, and you don't get a
Yeah.
backpack or whatever the case is. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight that too. The other aspect, and when I talk to students that I teach and I talk about how to react to pilot projects and what you're doing, is you really addressed it well, because I can't say enough about feedback loops, meaning having points where you go back and you reassess. So the things you were seeing, you weren't. There's an advantage sometimes, obviously, when you're smaller than as opposed to as you grow. But the whole idea of that you were able to react fast to, let's say, the whatever you want to pick on, but let's say the lunch in a paper
Yeah.
bag, right? That's really important to not wait too long, especially if you're going down maybe
Yeah.
not the perfect corridor.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, I just wanted to mention is it's really important. I find that if you're leading the way, and to me, like you were being, especially being very specific, I think it's also important that you take into account how you're sharing that knowledge and what you're going to do, because if also I mean, you don't want to not help people, but you want to make sure that you have a process in place so you don't have those missteps. Because if you did, let's say use the example of we run out of backpacks for a week, then it might be publicized in a way, and then people will go, well, I'm hesitant to do a similar program. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
So I very much want to stress, and I love the fact that you covered it, like those beats that are important. So if people are thinking in their head, how do I do this? And I can't stress. And then, I mean, again, you've given me so many threats too, in terms of the research that you did, in terms of recognizing that even even being in the Barrie area, the fact that one school might have different requirements, whether it's time or maybe whatever happens, right, is very important to know in place. Because again, if you think also too that you start a pilot project, but you're scaling up or you're going to a different location, you want to make sure, which you illustrated well, that you're able to be aware of that there will be some changes that you really have to adapt to ahead of time. So I really appreciate that, Ian, because again, what you're doing is amazing. I want to publicize that. But I also think that if people are looking at how they want to, if they have these ideas in terms of starting on a smaller scale in their neighborhoods or so on, this will be kind of a helpful things to keep in mind, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I, sh I should probably get into, because this is always the challenge, right? That the challenges are very often in whatever projects we're doing are monetary, time-wise, and then the volunteer base too, in terms of having sufficient volunteers and not burning them out. So maybe we can hit those three topics. I know we've got so many threads, Ian, because you're great
Yeah.
at
No, it's
answering the
good.
question overall. But I guess if we're kind of doing, hey, as an example, how can people maybe overcome these things? So again, we don't have to take them in the exact order, but I mean, I usually find people are worried about the money thing as well in terms of how do I succeed and in the long term, right?
Yeah. So the money side for us, we created the foundation and we were very lucky to have the success we did in selling our business that gave us the means to start the foundation with some assets. And so it was our decision to use some of those assets to run the pilot program. So the pilot program was funded through the foundation and the means that it had. And with the then forecasting as we grow, we understood better what our cost structure was, what our cash flow needs were, and then we started to just we didn't want to fundraise and ask for money through all the different means that are out there until we could prove and be able to speak confidently that we could grow and what the benefit was. And so you talked about feedback loops. We
Yeah.
talked to the families. Any new family we bring on, we talk to them after the fourth week, and then typically after the third month or 12th week. And then there's sort of periodic conversation with them. We're getting anecdotal stories, not a lot of quantitative, sorry, feedback. That's difficult,
Gotcha.
but qualitative more. And so that then, once we had a year of information, now we could go and speak to people who might be interested in supporting this cause with confidence about the value, the impact, the benefit, and for us, the understanding how we would manage the money. Again, coming from a business background, creating a cash flow forecast that, in business, sure, selling something is important, but managing cash flow is the key thing. And when you're a foundation, your revenue source are donors. And the expense goes all straight into the food that we're going to buy. So, we set out a fundraising target for next calendar year for 2026. So right now we're fundraising for 2026. And we want to have at least 6 to 9 months worth of cash fundraised so that if there is some type of lack of funds, we have a runway of 6 to 12 months to adapt and decide whether we should grow or not, or add more kids to the program. So managing the cash flow, is a constant thing that we're looking at. Again, we've got the benefit as a foundation to have a bit of buffer there from the assets that the foundation has. But now we've got a message to go out to the community to say, here, we've created a system, we've identified the need, we know how to go into the schools, we've got the blessing by the school board, we've got a structure, we're just getting the better, sources for food in place so we can expand. So we've got all that, and now people can, support the cause and have, efficient use of their money to feed kids.
I appreciate it. And again, we're covering so much ground, so I don't want to lose some of the things that you're bringing in terms of people are going, okay, how do I address this? I also want to mention, because you brought the thread up now too, in terms of working with the school boards. So I think it's helpful. My impression is too, but once you establish the success, it might have been, I'm assuming it might have been a little hard at the beginning, but once you have one school board, maybe it's a little easier because the word spreads. So that's
Yeah.
why I kind of also stress the point of making sure that if you create a pilot, it's as structured as possible in terms of having the partners on board, your transparency, bringing them on, and so on.
So
So
in
yeah,
that regard, we tried initially to go to the school board to say, here's our idea, blah blah blah, with little success. Because who are we? And we have no proven track record. What's our motive? I understand, and the school board has to control who has access into the school, to the
yeah,
kids, and there are unfortunately some people with ulterior motives. So through our connections in the food security space in Barrie, we were connected with the principal of a very high need school in Barrie, and just went directly to them and talked to the principal there, and she was game. She goes, "I've got a lot of children who need this support. Let's just do it." And so we did it, and we ran through the pilot program. And then at the end of that school year, the school board was really receptive to go, "Hey, okay, it is successful, it's sustainable," and now they've been working with us to help identify what other schools we should and could expand to. But there's many other sources for that information. So, it's kind of obvious in Barrie for all these social service type organizations where the highest needs are. So, but yeah, we're now working more closely with these agencies to and getting their support and them advocating for us as well.
I appreciate, because I think that's, again, if people are listening and thinking of how they're going to approach things, I think that's important too, in terms of the identifying where you can reach out and be within a certain structure while still accomplishing what you're doing. And, in general too, I find that if we're looking at government sources, sometimes NGOs are in positions where they're made to compete a little bit with each other as opposed to working together. So the part I also wanted to get to is, so if you're a smaller NGO and you're hands-on, or maybe you're just starting up a project, and not to put you on the spot, Ian, because we can just have a general discussion. But in terms of, so what about, people who maybe want to start off a project, but they don't have the resources in place, right? In terms of monetary, because again, I think that bears mentioning in terms of, maybe if we can recommend to people, I would say, really do an assessment on my end. And I'm going to pass it
Yeah,
over to you. Do an
yeah,
assessment of what resources might be in place. Don't be shy to look at who's doing similar things, even if maybe your scope is a little different, not to reinvent the wheel, and see where the supports were. And hopefully, in general, people are helpful. So they'll say, hey, this worked for me. I'm concentrating on this. You don't have to hit the same obstacles I did. So I kind of wanted to get into that. And again, it's a very broad topic I'm
yeah.
throwing at you, but I'd love to get your take on it.
I think I can absolutely see how somebody can be passionate about addressing a challenge they see and want to get hands on and be enthusiastic. I've got the answer. I'm going to go do it. And they run out there and they try to find the funds and then create the processes to address the need and not be aware of the one, two, or five other organizations that are playing in that space that are
Yeah,
already trying to address the need, but maybe not exactly in the way that you want it. And that can be challenging because you're by not being aware of the players, then you're probably running into them, you're overlapping, a little bit less, not as efficient, maybe creating friction. So we've seen that a little bit, and that's partly why we spent so long. The foundation was in place for 3 years before we started Kids Pantry, because we were going and supporting these other organizations before we decided we saw the gap and had the desire to try to fill the gap of food on weekends for kids. So I think good intentioned, energetic people need to take a pause for a sec and do the research if they're seriously looking about creating a long-term type of program. There can be short-term initiatives. Let's try to help families on Thanksgiving. Those are great, or Christmas hampers, or whatever the once every so often type of services. But if you're wanting to do something that is continuous and ongoing and potentially expand, it's a business. And a business needs a business plan, and it needs a source of revenue, of money coming in. And then you need a workforce to support that. You talked about the HR side, and you need processes that are repeatable. And that sounds kind of boring because you just want to go fill a backpack with food, but that's not scalable. And if the
yeah.
desire is to scale and address a larger, greater need, it can be difficult to take that breath and pause. But I think you also mentioned something about how do you get the resources, right? Which
Right.
resources, for the most part, comes down to the actual product or the money. Another thing that we decided, it would have been really easy for us in the beginning to go knock on a few doors of places and say, hey, you're a bakery. Do you have any leftover buns and pastries? Hey, you're a butcher shop. Do you have any leftover chicken legs or whatever? And then get all this very well-intentioned donations and then figure it out. And for us, that wasn't a sustainable structure. We didn't want the chaotic element of not knowing what we're going to get week to week. We wanted predictability because predictability allows us to scale. So we've turned away those offers because it doesn't fit into our system. But maybe you were looking for, hey, whatever, maybe your idea is whatever is available. I want to try to channel it through to somebody. That's great. That's a different kind of program right there. But I think coming up with a system and a structure, if there's an individual there who has some type of money that they want to put behind the energy of a person and a good cause, then most of those people who are going to give the money want to see some type of thought out plan, not just the energy. A plan without somebody who's energetic doesn't work, and someone who's energetic without a plan doesn't work. You kind of need both. And so I think figure out the structure of what you want to do and then put the energy behind it.
I think that's a great point too, in the sense of by no means would I ever want to discourage people from doing things. But then one of the key points to me that you brought up is there are occasions where, yeah, it would work as a one-off. So maybe, for instance, the donations you talked about, whether it's around based around maybe a certain holiday too, or something's going on where there's more opportunity. Not, you don't want to waste those opportunities. But again, the beats that I appreciate that you hit, and I really wanted to stress is the consistency of it, right? Because again, especially when we're talking about food insecurity, I feel the same way in housing as well. You don't want to create stress and uncertainty. You want to make sure that you can deliver over a long time. So it takes a bit of planning. And again, sometimes that just takes, the thought of connecting with people. I mean, we can go down, a different path too, because even for instance, if you're structured, I would argue that whatever grant you're looking for as an example, if that's what you pursue, whether it's through government or you've made a really good point in terms of individuals, yeah, they're
Yeah,
going to look at the reality of it. And then you might very well run into the program or the issue of, why would they choose to invest their limited funds, because everything seems limited these days
yeah,
in terms of your program versus someone who maybe has been doing it longer. So again, I never want to discourage people, but when we talk about pilots, you really want to be specific what you're doing from my viewpoint, and you would want to see again explore the landscape, see if there are people that are again and that maybe similar wheel well, similar project, and you
yeah,
can gain the strengths. As I said, I mean, for me, from the viewpoint as I see when I mention NGOs, that's where I see where there's definitely more opportunity to work together, especially again if you're looking for representing some of the government on a bigger scale where they can go, okay, that makes sense.
yeah,
Off you go, as opposed to if we someone just coming up and, hey, I've got a great plan. You kind of, like you said, hand me some money and just trust me, I'm gonna take care of it, right? It gets
yeah,
very problematic. And I mean, I made this point before too. And again, I want people to volunteer, to get involved, not to lose the idea. So by no means do you not want to do certain projects that if you have a passion for, but you want to make sure you do a thorough assessment of them and see the reality. Like what I always recommend is do the risk assessment first. What are the worst things that could happen? So, running out of funds in the middle of a project,
yeah,
and then maybe not having a volunteer base. I wanted to come back to that too, right?
yeah,
So from my viewpoint, I've some groups I've worked with, especially when the pandemic shutdown started, I was recommending that if you can, it's difficult, but try to get even more volunteers than you might think you might need, because people, especially when people want to help, they'll just keep going and going, and then they hit their wall as well. And then, if maybe I'll pass it over to you because I think it also bears mentioning that you do have some volunteers, but you want to make sure you have enough on board to make sure deliveries happen, right? And
yeah.
maybe the challenges around that.
Yeah, we're right now, if we didn't have any volunteers, Sarah and I could handle everything. It'd be a bunch of work, but we could handle it. But we're purposefully, again, it gets to this planning and structure and in bringing on volunteers. Like we just had a student here about half an hour ago help pre-packing our bins for the next 2 weeks. We could have done it ourselves, but we need to make sure that we set things up so that someone else can do it. Because when it becomes 1 or 200 bins that we have to pack every week, it's more than what one person or one couple could do. So we are purposely bringing on volunteers a little bit earlier than we need them, so that we can work out the kinks, like how do you break up a task? How do how long is the right amount of time for what we're doing? Is it a 2 hour chunk? Is it a 4 hour, half hour? So we're iterating and learning as we bring on these volunteers. And we're getting ready too, because come in about 2 months, we're going to about double in size as we bring on some more schools. So I've got another driver volunteer to do deliveries starting next week. Uh, going to shadow one of our drivers for about the next 4 or 5 weeks so they get the feel for it. So that come January, they can go. So it's a sort of thought out process. But you also want to make sure that you don't burn out yourself. So we might have the desire and the energy to do it ourselves, but at a certain point, if it's all in just our brains and nobody else's, and it's just our desire and wish to do this and nobody else's, then it's unsustainable. Because we can't do this forever, but we want this to continue on as long as it's needed. So there's another, ulterior motive there is spread the desire around so there's more enthusiasm to do the volunteering work. So that's kind of an important thing as well. I've seen a lot
There's
of organizations that there is a super passionate person at the lead, and almost everything revolves around them. And if they aren't there for whatever reason, causes them to not be in part of the organization anymore, the organization is gone. The corporate memory, the knowledge, the enthusiasm, the desire goes with them, and they can flounder sometimes. So you need to sort of spread that seed around.
No, again, so many great points in there. I didn't realize they had so you're kind of, I would say in some ways, maybe well ahead of the curve because I didn't realize you had the cushion of being able to handle it just with you and your spouse. So
Yeah,
that's really, if you can do it, that's super, super great. Like you've got that built in. Definitely from the student side, the one thing I also wanted to mention is I love the fact that you're involving volunteers because what I found from my experiences, especially when people are younger, it takes, if they get involved, then it's a positive volunteering aspect and, they feel like they're having an impact and they're not over pressured to do it. It's almost like, it's almost like you develop that want and need to keep doing it. But someone has to kind of bring you to one and hopefully it's a good experience. I also mentioned to students sometimes too that like for instance, like I know your opportunity is great. I can safely say that. Sometimes maybe you're not, it's not where your passion is. So don't
Mhm.
also quit if you have one volunteer experience. Maybe you're working with a smaller group. Maybe you're frustrated because it's not as organized or whatever the case is. There's
Yeah,
so many other opportunities to help right now. So just keep doing it. And I find that everyone will get that passion.
sure.
But yeah, you're really making my job very easy because you're hitting the beats that I just wanted people to hear in terms of the caution and so on. And in terms of, I do want to talk about, the passion developing projects and the legacy, right? If I talk about, I was very fortunate to do a pilot project that because this resonates with me in terms of with Service Canada for bringing different newcomer groups to interact more with the government offices. There was a need there. But when I finished the 1 year run on that project, it was important to documents in place that included, the costing, what was the ideal place, what maybe wasn't perfect, so that if you weren't there, then yeah, someone else could pick it up. They weren't reinventing the wheel. They didn't have to pick up the phone and go, "Hey, can we find the person who was involved in this particular aspect of this project?"
Yeah.
So that's really important too. I think if I can ask you too, right? I see that as a strength in terms of you develop the foundation as a family concern. So you've got that kind of a built-in maybe stability, like you mentioned with Sarah, your spouse,
Yeah.
and so on, right? So I'm wondering if you can talk about that too, as opposed to, the difficulty maybe of bringing people into your exact idea versus maybe people who you're on the same page already.
That is a really big point. So with a family foundation, so you can have a foundation and you can have a family foundation, kind of like a charity. So our family foundation is a charity, but you can have a public foundation and a family foundation and a private foundation. If it's a private foundation or a family foundation, then you're allowed to have all the board members or the controlling board be at arm's length. So right now, all the directors of the Pavlik Foundation have the last name Pavlik. We're all aligned. It's Sarah and I and our 2 kids. We talk about it all the time when we're on family trips, our weekend calls. Our kids are in university and out of university now. We have our board meetings. We structure them the same way. We take minutes. We do everything kind of by the book. Um, but we're in control. It's like running our own business. If you were to be just a public foundation, well, then you cannot have people at arm's length on the board. There have to be at arm's length. Sorry, is what I mean. So you can't have related people around, which means now the control shifts to consensus, and that also means that the direction of the charity of the foundation can waver over time. So I think it's even more critical for those types of organizations to have clear, defined mission and purpose so that the board can rally around it, and clear guidelines to what the program that they're trying to run is intended for, so that you don't get, well, I think it's my personal opinion, and I believe it's probably out there too, is that you don't have the same people on the board for a long period of time. Now, I say that, and we have a family foundation that's going to be us for a while, but we do have plans to bring other voices into it. But that you need periodic turnover on a board so you don't get the burnout, but you've got to marry that with consistent focus and vision in the organization so it doesn't drift.
I appreciate making that point too, because that's exactly the balance that I find, especially when you're looking at different projects where you have to be able to adapt over time too. The landscape can change, right? So for instance, maybe as an example, maybe something innovative will happen 10 years from now, right? I mean, maybe not, but maybe we change something to do with food, right? And then if you just stay kind of doing things the way you're doing, maybe it won't be as effective and so on. So that also helps too. I find like bringing in people, bringing in the experts and being open to it. But I so very much agree with you when we're discussing how people could approach things is there's that balance of yeah, being very clear in your mission, what you're trying to accomplish. And maybe even in the when you're starting up a foundation or whatever the part or whatever you're working on, you want to make sure they have very open and transparent conversations, that everyone's on the same page. If I use your example, it would be, let's say, I think it's so important the scope that you did. You concentrated on backpacks, weekends, children, food. So if you bring in, let's say, maybe a board too quickly, you have too many people coming on there, and their vision is, no, we're going to feed everybody in the household, but you
Yeah.
don't have the resources for it. So again, I mean, I'm
Or
making
let's
it
go over
maybe
here and let's feed
simpler.
these people. I see there's a need here and there's a need here. So one of the challenges that we face constantly, actually, it's a constant conversation, is we're able to support this many kids. Do we support one kid at 100 schools or 100 kids at one school? The cost
Yeah.
is the same. Is the impact the same? Do we go to more schools with a smaller number of kids, or do we grow the number of kids at the schools? So, I think it speaks also to, if you, but keep the focus narrow, or you start to expand it and say, okay, well, let's support. So we support kids that are going to school, which typically means they live in some sort of house or apartment or rent controlled space. We're not directly supporting the unhoused. Uh, why? Well, it's partly because it doesn't fit the scope of what we're doing. It's not that we don't think it's important, but we can't. That's a whole different type of food. How do they cook it? The delivery mechanism, blah blah blah. So, we're not saying it's not an important need, but we're keeping focused on what our program intention is about.
And I think too, Ian, it's the, let's say, for instance, even simple things that might seem very simple, but you have to take into account. So when you're expanding, into a second school, even things such as, I'm sure if you're delivering by car, it's an increase in cost of delivery. You got to kind of balance that in terms of where the need is versus where you can reasonably deliver it without causing a slowdown maybe of the program, is the way I would say it.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to highlight one thing too, because that is really evident to me is, so, because we talked about anecdotal, and I love the fact we did, because I think that was really important when we talked about the parents. Because again, I was very like to see you present, and that was one of the things that really jumped out at me. So I think it's important how, there's like, you can call it domino effects, or kind of helping along the way, where you're having an impact here, but it has an impact on the parents, it has an impact here. But you also have a balance. So I just want to make sure that, because it's not anecdotal as well, I just want to stress the part too, like the research that you were doing in terms of looking at the map, in terms of where the need is of schools. So maybe I'll just get you to, because we covered so much ground, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate this
Yeah.
conversation. And I think you made it really easy for people to listen to. And my main reason for having you here too is so that people can go, maybe what are my stumbling blocks, right? Or what can I do to be more effective? Because I do find that a lot of people want to help, but they're not sure where. So kind of reach out to people, listen to people in whatever areas, combine the NGOs. But I definitely just want to take us to in terms of if you can talk a little bit about in terms of how you assess them, and you did a little bit, but in terms of the needs map, right? And when you pick the schools, a little
Yeah.
more.
So the in that period of doing a bit of research to find out what all the different organizations are doing, we had a lot of dialogue. And when we would talk, we had about 6 months or more of forming the idea of Kids Pantry, and we bounce it off of people in different food security type organizations and say, where would you think the greatest need is? And again, it was more anecdotal. They would say, I think in this area, I think over in this part of Barrie or this part of Barrie. And we kept hearing the same regions and referencing the same schools. So when we actually talked with the health department and someone, a dietitian, when we're looking at the menus, and the dietitians work at the schools as well. That's how we got the connection into the really high need school that we're currently in Steele Street. So it was through conversation and I would say research and just understanding the lay of the land. What was nice is that it was clear we were addressing a need where we were. And then when we started to have evolving conversations with the food bank, they said, oh, by the way, here's a heat map of what individuals and families and households, it's actually what households are accessing the food bank. We suddenly went, oh, that's exactly the areas that we're currently servicing. So it validated what we were already doing and actually informed us and to expand into a few other schools that had the need as well. But talking to the school board, they said the same things, both the public school board and the Catholic school board, talking with people at the health unit, talking with someone who affiliated with the school bus uh, system. They know because they're driving into different regions and different schools. They know which schools have more challenges than others. So all those points of feedback informed us of where we're going to or where we are expanding to and growing.
I appreciate it, Ian, because that was the other thing I was aware of from your past presentation. So when they get to the heat map, and I just have maybe two more things for us because we're covering so much ground, and you're very generous in making it easy in terms of giving people the scope. I just want to mention as well, like from my experiences, in 2020, I remember doing a needs assessment in for seniors and caregivers in Barrie. And so you do want to gather the data, and if you can, it might be harder. You want to cross-reference. So I just want to mention that if people are looking at
Yeah,
it. So you can't, I mean, there's sometimes there might be limitations, things that you do and so on. But one thing that stood out for me too is you want to make sure that you really are very, you look at your assumptions, you talk to people, and then you follow up as much as you can with the actual data. And the food bank giving you that map is great. Like I think huge kudos to them. But I found, for instance, on the surveys I was talking about, there was really one discrepancy that stood out was meal prep, right? So the seniors, for instance, said, and again, it was super high numbers, like we're talking 90 plus versus like a 70% of the caregivers, where seniors said meal prep, not an issue. Caregivers said huge issue, right? So then you have to go revisit and follow up your data. And then, there's no, once I dug into it, you find different things, right? So same thing as you're assessing, you're kind of listening to people, but you're looking at, I got to be really, I'm passionate about helping, but I got to be realistic. What is happening here, right? So in my case, it was simply a case of people didn't want to, present that they couldn't meal prep, but I would have missed that point if I simply went, hey, the survey proves it, right? So I just really wanted to stress as a point for people as they're doing it, because you made a really nice point about passion. I think the passion sometimes can drive you to, well, there's an assumption. So do the balance, do the
we
grassroots, but
we had a few assumptions in the very beginning. We thought that we we didn't know what the living situation would be for the kids that we were delivering food to, and through other organizations painted a more dire living situation than we've encountered so far. So we had certain assumptions that households, the majority wouldn't have anywhere to cook, or they just have a hot plate. Well, that is true in some small cases, but not predominantly. Um, we're prepared for more diversity from an ethnic or a cultural perspective, but so far that hasn't happened. We haven't had the need to adapt that much. We're ready for it, and we made some small adaptations, but not as large. So again, it's that we assumed certain things, but informed along the way caused us to not change or to change in a different way.
Well, and same thing too, Ian. There's, the ethnic mosaic. There's other questions, other things I could ask you about. I feel like we could eventually do a part two, but I really appreciate that. I felt like you were able to kind of give me what I would consider a nice starting point, especially for people that things they should consider when they have a passion for a topic they want to get involved in. And that overriding theme, definitely the scope. How do you pick? What's the impact? And just being really aware doing the risk assessment. But one thing I want to make sure before we leave too. So can you, in whichever way is most helpful to you, can you let people know how they can help your foundation?
Sure, yeah. If you visit kidspantry.ca, so KIDSPANTRY.ca, that has all the information about the Kids Pantry program. It's a subsection of our Pavlik Foundation website. So you can learn about the areas to volunteer, the type of food that goes into a backpack, and the wonderful organizations that are supporting us. And if someone is interested in supporting us, we're always open to having conversations for whatever way that might be. Because in the end, so what we do is we budget $25 per kid per weekend. And even if we were able to get the price down, say to $22, that means we spend a little more money to get that price back up to 25 on fresh fruit and vegetables. So more than a third of the kids' backpack is fresh fruit, vegetables, and cheese. So our goal is to have a consistent amount of as healthy as possible, given sort of what our food system is like these days. So yeah, go to kidspantry.ca and you can learn a lot more there.
The only other thing too, Ian, I wasn't going to add this, but you brought up such an important point. I don't want people to miss it as well. I know this is true for food bags, and again, kind of what you've said. Very often there are partnerships or ways where if you donate money, it's more effective than a person, let's say, purchasing food directly
Yeah,
themselves and saying,
for sure.
"Here you go, Ian. Here you go, food bank." They have agreements in place where, again, if you're able to and you donate a certain dollar amount, it's going to go a lot further if you donate it to whether the foundation, the food bank, whoever you're trying to help. So I do want people to be
I
aware of
can
that.
guarantee you I can buy a box of Kraft Dinner or a can of corn cheaper than anybody who's listening right now. So while we would appreciate someone to say, it would be wonderful if they said, here's some canned goods. We'd want to make sure that the things we're looking for, not a large can of pasta sauce because it's too heavy for a kid in the backpack. It's got to be a certain size and a certain weight. But the financial support means that we can use those funds as efficiently as possible.
Thank you. And I'm gonna again, I mean, we could keep going, but I feel again, I'm very grateful because I feel like we've again, there's always things you have to look at, but we've kind of given a crush course discussion on things that you might want to consider
Yeah.
before you delve in, so people can kind of hopefully sit back and think about how do I have an impact that is long lasting, that creates a boundary kind of or a intertwining of my passion versus having the like a true impact and not letting people down by programs ending too soon. Let's keep it going.
Yeah.
So yeah, much gratitude, Ian. Like you're doing great work, to say the least.
Well, thank
And
you for
again,
letting
I
us
appreciate
share
it.
our story. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So that's it for us. I appreciate it.